A devastating flood sweeps a German Shepherd puppy away, alone, terrified, and clinging to life. One man risks everything to save him, but what happens next shocks everyone. Witness a heart-stopping tale of courage, loyalty, and an unbreakable bond that proves heroes come in all sizes. If you're an animal lover, hit subscribe for more stories like this. It's completely free, and it inspires us to keep telling the ones that truly matter. The rain came down in sheets, drumming against rooftops, rattling gutters, and hammering the earth until streets turned into rivers. The swollen river that cut through the little town had already climbed its banks, spilling into backyards, swallowing cars, and forcing people to scramble to higher ground. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, a warning that this was no ordinary storm. It was a disaster in the making. For Michael, a quiet man in his 30s who worked as a mechanic, the storm was already too close for comfort. His small house sat on the edge of town, close enough to the river that the water now licked at the end of his driveway. He stood on the porch, soaked to the skin despite his raincoat, scanning the flooded street with unease. He had seen storms before, violent ones, destructive ones, but there was something about this one that felt different. As thunder cracked overhead and lightning illuminated the sky in jagged veins of white, Michael heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the chaos of rain and wind. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but then it came again, faint, high-pitched, and desperate. A puppy's cry. Michael's stomach tightened. He peered into the rushing floodwaters, his eyes straining through the gloom. And then he saw it. A small figure, tossed helplessly by the current, its tiny paws clawing at the water, its head barely above the churning brown surface. It was a German Shepherd puppy, no more than a few months old, swept along like driftwood in the flood. Michael didn't hesitate. He splashed off the porch, wading into the icy water. The current tugged at his legs immediately, threatening to drag him off his feet. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward, the cries of the puppy guiding him. Each second mattered. The little dog wouldn't survive long against the merciless current. "Hold on, buddy," he shouted, though his voice was drowned by the storm. The puppy vanished beneath the surface for a terrifying moment, then reappeared, sputtering and crying louder than before. Michael lunged, throwing himself chest deep into the water. The cold was shocking, stealing his breath, but he pushed forward with powerful strokes, fighting the current. He reached out just as the puppy was carried past him. His fingers brushed wet fur, and with a final desperate grab, he caught the scruff of its neck. The puppy yelped but clung to him instinctively, tiny claws digging into his soaked jacket. Michael cradled the trembling creature against his chest, turning back toward his house. But the river wasn't going to let him go so easily. The current slammed into him, forcing him sideways. He staggered, nearly losing his footing. For a moment, the thought crossed his mind that he might not make it back, that saving the puppy might cost him his own life. But then, through sheer willpower, he pressed on. Step by agonizing step, he dragged himself out of the current until, at last, he stumbled back onto higher ground. He collapsed onto the porch, water pouring off him in rivulets, the puppy pressed tightly against him. The little shepherd whimpered, shivering violently. Its fur was plastered to its thin frame, and Michael could feel its tiny heartbeat racing like a drum against his chest. He tucked the puppy inside his jacket, shielding it from the biting wind and rain. "You're safe now," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was saying it to the puppy or to himself. Inside his house, he wrapped the puppy in a blanket, kneeling by the fireplace as he coaxed the flames to life. The warmth spread slowly, and the puppy's tremors began to ease. It gazed up at him with wide, soulful brown eyes, full of fear but also something else, trust. Michael sighed heavily, rubbing the puppy's damp ears. "Where did you even come from, huh? All alone out there in this storm." The puppy gave a small whine and buried its nose against his arm as though answering him. Michael's heart twisted. He had never considered himself much of a dog person, but in that moment, with the storm raging outside and this fragile life depending on him, he felt a connection he couldn't explain. The storm raged on through the night, pounding at the windows, howling through the trees. But inside, by the fire, man and puppy clung to one another. Michael promised silently that he would keep the little shepherd safe, no matter what it took. What he didn't know was that saving this puppy would set into motion a chain of events far larger than he could imagine. This wasn't just an act of kindness. This was the beginning of a story that would shock everyone who heard it, because the puppy carried with it a secret that would soon come to light. The river was relentless that day, swelling higher with every minute. The townspeople watched helplessly from the safety of the bank, their umbrellas whipping in the wind as debris rushed downstream. Among the chaos, the sharp sound of a puppy's bark pierced through the roar of the flood. Everyone froze. It was faint, but unmistakable, a desperate cry for help. Heads turned, scanning the waters, and then they saw it. A tiny German shepherd puppy clinging to a broken tree branch, carried violently by the current. Its small body trembled as the waves crashed around it. The little dog barked again, but its voice was nearly drowned out by the flood. Gasps spread through the crowd. "It won't survive," someone whispered. "The river's too strong." But one man didn't hesitate. Daniel, a quiet mechanic known in town for keeping to himself, dropped his jacket without a word. His eyes were fixed on the terrified puppy as though nothing else in the world mattered. The current was fierce, filled with sharp debris and swirling whirlpools, but Daniel's mind was already made up. "You'll drown," a woman cried as he kicked off his boots. "It's too dangerous." But Daniel didn't even look back. He took one deep breath and hurled himself into the raging water. The shock of the cold nearly stole his breath, but he forced himself forward. Every stroke was a battle. The river pulled him sideways, slammed him into floating branches, dragged at his legs with invisible hands. But Daniel's eyes never left the tiny shepherd. The puppy's paws slipped on the slick branch it clung to, its whimpers growing weaker. Panic stabbed through Daniel's chest as he realized he might not make it in time. He pushed harder, muscles burning, lungs screaming for air. "Hold on," he shouted, though the river swallowed his voice. In one final surge, Daniel reached the branch. The puppy yelped, eyes wide with terror. Gently but firmly, he wrapped one arm around the trembling body, clutching it to his chest. The dog was soaked and shivering violently, but alive. Now came the hardest part, getting back. The crowd on the bank erupted in shouts of encouragement, their hands outstretched as if willing Daniel closer. The current fought him with every kick, dragging him toward deeper water. Twice, his head dipped beneath the surface, but each time he came up gasping, clinging fiercely to the puppy. The tiny shepherd whimpered against him, but Daniel whispered hoarsely, "I've got you. You're safe now." Finally, with what felt like his last ounce of strength, Daniel's hand reached the rope someone had thrown from shore. Strong arms pulled him up, dragging both man and puppy onto the muddy ground. For a long moment, Daniel lay flat on his back, chest heaving, rain pelting his face. Then he sat up, looking at the puppy in his arms. The little dog blinked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. Then, almost impossibly, it licked his cheek. The crowd cheered, the sound echoing across the storm. Daniel managed a tired smile. "You're safe now, little one," he murmured, his voice raw. The puppy, trembling but alive, curled into his chest as though it had chosen him in that instant. Something stirred in Daniel's heart, something he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know it yet, but saving this puppy would change his life forever. Because the river hadn't just carried a helpless animal to him. It had delivered a secret, one that would unravel everything Daniel thought he knew. The days following the rescue became a blur for Daniel. His clothes still smelled faintly of the floodwaters, a sharp reminder of the terrifying night he'd pulled the German shepherd puppy from the churning river. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the helpless creature's soaked fur, its frantic eyes, and the way its trembling body clung to his chest as though afraid he might vanish, too. Daniel named the puppy River. It seemed fitting, both a tribute to where their paths had crossed and a reminder of the fragile line between life and death. River had survived what many wouldn't have, and now, tucked safely in Daniel's cabin, he was finally able to rest. The first morning after, Daniel woke to find the pup curled against his leg, his small chest rising and falling in steady breaths. Daniel's heart ached at the sight. He'd spent years keeping his distance from companionship. especially the kind that wagged its tail and looked at you like you were its whole world. Memories of loss still haunted him, but this puppy didn't know about Daniel's past. All he knew was that the man beside him had been the one who pulled him out of the darkness. River was weak at first. His legs trembled when he tried to walk, and his whimpers pierced the silence of the cabin at night. Daniel took it upon himself to nurse him back to health. He dried him by the fire, fed him soft food in small portions, and spoke in low, calming tones that seemed to reassure the frightened pup. For the first time in a long while, Daniel found himself laughing again, softly, unexpectedly, when River tried to chew on the hem of his jacket or stumbled clumsily after a rolling log. But just as life seemed to settle into a fragile rhythm, Daniel noticed something strange. River would often sit by the cabin's front door at dusk, ears pricked and body tense. He wasn't looking at Daniel. His eyes were fixed on the tree line beyond the clearing. Sometimes his lips would curl in a faint growl. Other times he'd whine softly, as if expecting something, or someone, to appear from the shadows. At first, Daniel dismissed it as nerves. The pup had endured trauma. It was only natural he'd be jumpy. But as the days passed, River's behavior grew more insistent. He scratched at the door, barked into the night, and refused to settle until Daniel finally coaxed him back with gentle words. It was as though River was trying to warn him. One evening, while chopping wood outside, Daniel caught sight of it too, movement between the trees. A flash of something pale, gone before he could focus. His chest tightened. Was it just an animal? Or was someone out there, watching? He brushed it off, but unease crept into his thoughts. The flood had displaced more than just people. Wildlife had been driven closer to town, hungry and desperate. Perhaps River was simply sensing that. Still, the feeling gnawed at him. The following night, a storm rolled back into the valley. Rain pounded the roof, thunder cracked, and River whimpered at the sound of rushing water outside. Daniel lifted him into his lap, stroking his damp ears, whispering, "You're safe now. I've got you." The puppy leaned into him, trembling, his trust absolute. Then a sound. Not thunder. Not rain. Something else. A metallic clatter outside the cabin. Daniel stiffened, setting River gently on the floor. The pup growled, low and sharp, his tiny body rigid with alarm. Daniel grabbed the old flashlight from the shelf and moved cautiously toward the door. He pulled it open, light cutting through the rain, but the clearing was empty. Only trees swaying, the storm howling. But then his beam landed on something at the edge of the porch. A boot print. Fresh. Sinking into the mud. Daniel's pulse thundered. He hadn't had visitors in months, years, even. Who would be out here in this storm, near his cabin? And why hadn't they knocked? River barked sharply, breaking the silence, his tiny body pressed against Daniel's leg as though to shield him. The irony struck him. This little creature, rescued from death, already trying to protect the man who had saved him. Daniel closed the door quickly, latching it tight. He pulled the curtains shut and stoked the fire, though his hands shook slightly. He sat back down beside River, who hadn't stopped growling at the door, every hair on his back raised. "Easy, boy," Daniel whispered, though the words felt hollow. His eyes lingered on the shadows creeping against the cabin walls. Something, or someone was out there. Watching. Waiting. And River knew it long before he did. Daniel lay awake that night, the storm raging outside, River curled tightly at his side. He realized then that this rescue had bound them together in ways he hadn't expected. The puppy had come into his life as if pulled by fate, but with him came something else, something Daniel couldn't yet understand. But one thing was certain, this was no ordinary rescue. It was the beginning of something far bigger, far more dangerous than either of them could imagine. The night after Max's surgery was the longest of Daniel's life. He sat in the uncomfortable chair beside the recovery kennel, eyes locked on the tiny rise and fall of the puppy's chest. Every beep of the monitor echoed inside him like a fragile heartbeat tethering Max to this world. Daniel barely blinked, afraid that if he did, Max's breathing would falter. Nurses walked by, glancing in sympathy, whispering about the man who carried the flood puppy here. Daniel didn't hear them. His mind was replaying every moment of the rescue. how small Max felt in his arms, how his body had gone limp, and how for a terrifying second he believed he was already too late. That memory cut him sharper than any blade. He wouldn't lose him now. Hours stretched. When dawn began painting faint streaks of light across the windows, Max stirred. His paw twitched, then his ear flicked. Daniel leaned forward instantly. "Max, buddy, you're safe now." The puppy's eyes cracked open, weak, glazed, but alive. Daniel felt something inside him break and mend all at once. Tears he hadn't realized he was holding spilled down his cheeks. Dr. Evans entered soon after, checked Max's vitals, and allowed herself a rare smile. "He's a fighter. If he makes it through the next 24 hours, I'd say he has an excellent chance." Daniel finally exhaled. He reached through the kennel bars and gently touched Max's paw. The puppy tried to nuzzle his hand, as if remembering who had carried him from the water. That fragile touch was enough. It was a vow Daniel made silently then and there. No matter what it took, he would not let this dog go through life alone again. In the following days, Max began to recover. Each morning Daniel arrived early, sitting by his side for hours. He brought blankets, toys, and even read aloud just to let Max hear the sound of his voice. The bond forming between them was undeniable. Whenever Daniel stood to leave, Max's eyes would follow, pleading softly, and Daniel's heart would twist. On the fourth day, Dr. Evans approached him cautiously. "Daniel, you've been here nonstop. I can see what this puppy means to you. Once he's strong enough to be discharged, he'll need a permanent home. The shelter is already at capacity." She didn't finish, but the weight of her words was clear. Daniel swallowed hard. His life had been solitary since the accident years ago that had taken his wife and unborn child. He'd kept people at arm's length, convinced he didn't deserve connection anymore. His tiny apartment reflected that: bare walls, empty silence. Yet now, looking into Max's healing eyes, Daniel felt something stir he thought was gone forever. "Then he'll come with me," Daniel said firmly, surprising even himself. Dr. Evans' expression softened. "Are you sure? Raising a German Shepherd isn't easy. They need structure, patience, training." "I know," Daniel interrupted gently, "but he's already mine. He just doesn't know it yet." When the day finally came for Max to leave the hospital, Daniel carried him out wrapped in a blanket. Though still weak, the puppy wagged his tail for the first time since the flood. That tiny flicker of joy filled Daniel's chest with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. But just as they reached the parking lot, a young boy and his mother approached hurriedly. The boy's face lit up as he saw Max's mom. "That's him. That's the puppy from the news." Daniel stiffened. The woman looked at him, her eyes wide with recognition. "Sir, wait, please. We lost our German Shepherd puppy during the storm. We've been searching everywhere." "That's him. His name is Ranger." The words hit Daniel like a blow. He instinctively pulled Max closer. The puppy perked his ears at the sound of Ranger, his little body wiggling with faint excitement. The mother's eyes filled with tears. "Please, he's part of our family. We thought he drowned. Can we see him?" Daniel's heart thundered. Everything inside him screamed to protect Max, to never let him go. Yet the truth hung in the air, undeniable. This puppy belonged to someone else. He wasn't just a miracle Daniel found. He was a loved one returned. Max squirmed from his arms, wriggling toward the boy, licking his face with weak but eager joy. The boy cried, hugging him tightly. "Ranger, I knew you'd come back." Daniel stood frozen, his heart tearing in two. He had saved this puppy's life, held him through the darkness, promised he'd never be alone. Yet now, as Max wagged his tail in the boy's arms, Daniel realized the shocking, painful truth. Maybe this wasn't his dog to keep. But why then? He wondered as Max's eyes flicked back to him even while in the boy's embrace. Did it feel like fate had tied them together for a reason? And in that moment, Daniel knew the story wasn't over. Night fell heavy and silent, except for the dull roar of the river beyond the ridge. Daniel sat near the window, the German Shepherd puppy curled against his lap as if they had known each other forever. The farmhouse smelled faintly of wood smoke and damp wool, and the storm had left its mark everywhere: broken fences, drowned fields, collapsed sheds. Yet here, in this quiet pocket, there was life. The puppy stirred suddenly, ears twitching. Its nose lifted to the air as though it had caught something invisible. Daniel followed the motion, a ripple of unease crossing his chest. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, though the pup was still too small to understand commands. The scratching at the door came next. Slow. Relentless. Daniel froze. His mind rushed back to the night on the flooded road, the shadow in the trees, the feeling of being watched. The puppy stiffened, tiny teeth bared. He rose, heart hammering, and reached for the flashlight resting on the table. The beam cut through the dark as he unlatched the door, swinging it open just enough to peer outside. A figure stood on the porch, mud-caked, dripping, with eyes hollow from exhaustion. "Please," the man croaked, swaying. "The dog, did you find him?" Daniel's breath caught. "What?" The man stumbled forward, nearly collapsing against the frame. "My pup. He he was taken by the river. I searched for hours. Please tell me, please." His words broke into sobs. Daniel turned to the little shepherd in his arms, the same pup who had clung to life in the flood, who had led him back from despair. The puppy was staring at the man, ears perked, tail quivering in recognition. It wriggled free of Daniel's grasp and bounded toward the stranger with surprising strength for its size. The man dropped to his knees, arms wide, as the puppy buried itself against his chest, whimpering with joy. Daniel stood motionless, throat tight. The bond between them was undeniable. The man kissed the pup's wet fur, tears streaking the mud on his face. "I thought I lost you forever." For a moment, Daniel felt his world collapse. He had just begun to believe this puppy was his second chance, the companion who would heal the scars left behind by tragedy. And now, in a single heartbeat, it was gone, returned to someone else. But then, the man's eyes met his. "Sir, thank you. You don't understand what you've done. He's the last thing I have left. The flood took my home, my fields, my family's land. But this pup, he's all I've got." His voice cracked. "If you hadn't saved him, I wouldn't have had a reason to go on." Daniel's chest ached. He remembered the emptiness he'd felt just days ago, the weight of his own loss pressing down like the storm. He knew what it was to lose everything. The pup yipped, wriggling from the man's arms again. To Daniel's shock, it ran back to him, pressing its tiny body against his leg, as if refusing to choose one life over the other. The man laughed through his tears, shaking his head. "Looks like he doesn't want to let you go either." And in that fragile, rain-soaked night, something shifted. They weren't rivals for the love of this little dog. They were survivors, bound by loss, brought together by the very creature who refused to be torn apart by fate. Daniel crouched, stroking the pup's fur as it darted between them, tail wagging wildly. Maybe his voice was hoarse. "Maybe he belongs to both of us." The man blinked, taken aback. Then slowly, he nodded. Shared custody of a flood dog? They both laughed, the sound rough but real. And so it began, not the ending Daniel had imagined, but something stranger, stronger. In the days that followed, he and the stranger, whose name was Tom, rebuilt what they could. They patched fences, cleared wreckage, and in the center of it all was the little shepherd, dashing between them, a spark of life against the ruin. The storm had taken much, but it had given something back too, a reason to hope, a reminder that even in disaster, connections could be forged. Weeks later, the town gathered at the riverside, remembering what was lost and what had been saved. Daniel stood with Tom at his side, the shepherd between them, its head held high. When someone asked the pup's name, Tom looked at Daniel, then back at the crowd. "Hope," they said together. And in that moment, with the river flowing quietly behind them, it was clear the dog had not just survived the flood. He had saved them both. The storm finally broke into silence. The floodwaters receded, leaving behind mud, wreckage, and silence where once there had been chaos. Michael stood on the bank, soaked to the bone, clutching the German shepherd puppy close to his chest. The little dog shivered but no longer whimpered. Its tiny heartbeat thumped hard and fast against Michael's ribs, alive, fighting, clinging. Rescuers began arriving by boat, scanning for survivors. When they saw Michael with the dog, one man shouted, "We got a live one." Both of them. They pulled him aboard, and Michael collapsed into the bottom of the raft, refusing to let go of the pup. "Sir, are you hurt?" a medic asked, shining a light in his eyes. Michael shook his head weakly. "Not me. Him. He needs help." His voice cracked. Wrapped in a dry blanket, the puppy was examined. "He's lucky," the medic whispered. "Any longer in that water and he'd be gone." But the puppy was more than just lucky. Over the next days, as Michael recovered in a temporary shelter, he discovered something incredible. Flyers were being posted everywhere. Missing pets, missing people. And one in particular caught his eye. "Lost German Shepherd puppy, answers to Max. Last seen before the flood swept our home." Michael froze, staring at the photo. It was the same puppy. He asked around until he was pointed to a young woman named Sarah. Her face was pale with worry as she sifted through lists of evacuees. When Michael approached with the dog cradled in his arms, her eyes filled instantly with tears. "Max," she whispered. The puppy's ears perked, tail twitching, as though recognizing her voice. He gave a weak bark. Sarah broke down, rushing forward to hold him. Michael hesitated, his heart torn. He had saved this dog. He had nearly drowned for him. In those terrifying hours, he'd felt a bond so deep, it was as though the puppy's fight for life had pulled him from his own despair. But now, this wasn't his dog. "He's yours," Michael said softly, handing Max over. His arms felt strangely empty as the puppy nestled into Sarah's embrace. Through tears, Sarah explained, "Max belonged to my little brother, Ethan. Ethan didn't survive the flood. Max was all he had left. I thought I'd lost him too." The weight of her words settled over Michael. Ethan, a child gone. But somehow, this tiny life had endured. He realized then that saving Max wasn't just about the dog. It was about saving the last piece of someone's world. Sarah looked at him, her gratitude shining through grief. "You risked everything for him." "What?" Michael swallowed, voice thick. "Because I couldn't let go. I've lost too much before. And when I saw him in that water, I just knew. His life mattered." She touched his arm gently. "Then maybe you were meant to find him." In the days that followed, Sarah and Michael stayed in touch. She invited him to visit Max, and each time, the puppy bounded to Michael with unshakable joy, as if he remembered who had pulled him from death itself. Eventually, Sarah admitted she was struggling, working 2 jobs, rebuilding her home, and coping with grief. "I don't know if I can care for Max the way he deserves," she confessed one evening. "But I can't give him up completely. Would you take him in? Share him with me? He loves you." Maybe Ethan would have wanted it this way. Michael's heart swelled. He bent down as Max licked his face, tail wagging furiously. "Yes," he whispered. "I'll take care of him. Always." And so, out of the wreckage of loss, something unexpected was born. A bond not just between man and dog, but between 2 broken souls learning to heal. Max grew stronger each day, his playful spirit returning, his bark echoing through Michael's once empty home. For the first time in years, Michael no longer woke to silence. He woke to paws on the floor, to a wagging tail, to a reason to get up. Neighbors would often ask, "Is that your dog?" Michael would smile, scratching Max's ears. "He's family." But deep down, Michael knew the truth. Max had saved him just as much as he had saved Max. Because sometimes, in the middle of tragedy, when everything is swept away, life finds a way to give us back more than we lost. And what Michael found in that raging flood was not just a puppy. He found hope, loyalty, and the reminder that even in the darkest waters, love survives.